Howdy, howdy, friends. How are you guys doing? Today, we're going to do this video that was highly suggested, the demographic collapse. Well, I think it's a video series called China's Reckoning. This is part one, and it talks about demographic collapse. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think there's out there this very false idea that China is already like the global superpower, or that at least is close to like catching on to America to become like that superpower. And in terms of like money and like pure cash, that may be true, but like there's a lot of shit behind the surface when it comes to China. And one of the topics is the demographic collapse. You know, Chinese people aren't having enough babies. Not only that, but China had like the one child policy. If you like this view, like I'm testing new things. So if you like me having the view box like on this side of the screen, tell me if it's better, if you like it better than the last one. China's demographic collapse. And this video is from the YouTuber Polymatter, so you know what's up, guys. Go support the original creator and go support your boy as well on the links of the description. By the way, if I look like shit, yeah, it's Sundays, okay? This is my Sunday close, so don't go at me,
In
guys.
December 1988,
Whoa.
the leaders of China and India met for the first time in nearly 3 decades. The summit, which came after years of tense border disputes, marked a turning point towards friendlier relations.
I mean, still today, right?
It was a time of hope, a China in transition. The range of possibilities, then, was wide, and as the millennium came to a close, all eyes were on the future of the continent. Amidst this optimism, China's leader Deng Xiaoping was skeptical. Despite what people have predicted, he cautioned, there was no guarantee of an Asian century. Never mind that he coined this term with hesitation, the concept of an Asian century would soon take on a life of its own, thanks to a pattern of successes. There was its relatively stronger performance during the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, I love it. Like, Greece goes really down, bro.
The rapid growth of its 4 tigers, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, and
Chinese
of course,
Taipei.
its explosive population and middle class.
So would say China, I don't care.
The premise was that as Asia's supply chains integrated, its navies modernized, and trade dominated, this momentum would shift the global center of gravity to the east.
Nope.
This notion, increasingly rephrased as the rise of China, escaped the fringes, entered the public consciousness, and was thoroughly beat into all of our heads. Though likely to evoke different emotions, its truthfulness was no longer controversial, and then no longer even interesting. A cliché. It's not hard to see why. It contextualizes and attaches an enviable momentousness to the present moment in time. In just 2 words, it neatly encapsulates 3 centuries of history into that of Europe, America, and now Asia. It seems to confirm what we already know, in a way that suggests a larger trend, a narrative. At the same time, the nebulousness of what it implies in concrete terms helped it evade scrutiny and take on several independent meanings. After years, now decades, of snowballing predictions, optimistic models, best-selling books, and emotive profiles designed to stoke fear, after 10,000 repetitions of the next superpower, great power rivalry, China's grand strategy, and the remaking of the world order, this once very simple idea
People
has
are
lost
milking
all
this
sight
shit,
of reality.
you know?
Like an overvalued startup, unchecked hyperbole has driven its mental.
Because at the end of the day, we love the underdog story. And I think what China has accomplished in a lot of ways is like very impressive. The amount of people that it has lifted from poverty. I mean, the GDP per capita of China has surpassed the one from Mexico, where like a decade ago, that wasn't even close to being the case. So on one part, you know, credit where credit is due.
Market share way out of proportion.
But I think people just like
beneath the mountains of wishful thinking and grandiose predictions, there is merit, make no mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's time for a return to the fundamentals. A reckoning is long overdue. This is part 1.
Which really makes me wonder, though. Think about it. You guys, especially the ones that are in America, are seeing everything that's going on with like the supply crisis, which I'm not like qualified to talk about, but on my very basic understanding of things is basically a failure on a lot of things in the American system, like the ports, the trucker, a lack of truckers, problems with the containers, an increase of the demand, so and the supply can catch up right now. So it's a very complex subject, but it's America's problem, right? Like here in Mexico we're fine. Many places in Europe I think have a similar problem, but not that bad. But what's going to happen, okay, when China, the title of this video series is China's Reckoning, right? And we're trying to, I guess, uh pursue the idea that the Chinese miracle is not really going to last. And as a matter of fact, China's gonna face some real hard ass problems. So, what's gonna happen with things like the supply chain when all of that happens in China?
We begin with the challenge to China's supremacy, which underpins
Oh
all
yeah, and
others.
this is a doozy.
One
Yeah.
so insidious that it can only be solved by its very nature over the course of
Yeah,
decades.
this is serious.
China will soon run out of people.
Yeah, like no joke.
Sponsored by CuriosityStream and Nebula,
Sponsored by
where you can
McDonald's,
watch the
dude.
extended version of this
Oh, there's an
video.
extended.
The
Do I have Nebula? I guys, like no joke. I think I have like Nebula. Oh yeah, no shit. I actually like have Nebula, which is pretty cool. So I guess I'll watch it.
absolute size of a population says a lot about it. In the broadest of strokes, a big country buys more things, giving it greater leverage. A tiny country, on the other hand, will more likely rely on its neighbors. None of this is revolutionary, which is to say, there's a good reason that when we talk about the size of a country in relation to its global significance, we're usually referring not to its square footage, but number of unique humans.
Yep.
The problem is that this number can also be just as misleading as it is useful. When we compare population sizes, we mentally take for granted a typical nation. We imagine, in other words, a similar proportion of doctors, students, seniors, babies, and plumbers. A reasonable shorthand for 90% of conversations. This, however, is one of the remaining 10. Big, uniquely consequential countries get that way by adopting big, uniquely consequential
There's my guy,
policies,
Dow.
which means this single number
Or is he
just
Dow
won't
shipping? I
cut
don't know.
it. Ideally, we could visualize each individual person, along with their education, occupation, and household size, things which, on average, are known to affect their nation as
John
a
Smith.
whole. But in the absence of some revolution in infographics, demographers have settled on the next best thing, realizing that just one number is remarkably accurate at predicting your contribution to the country: age. To show this, a population pyramid splits a country into age cohorts. The longer the rectangle, the larger that share of the population. The magic thing about age is that while sure the precise boundaries of things like retirement and adulthood may differ slightly between countries,
Yeah.
cohort behavior is tied to a set of universal biological facts which transcend culture.
Yeah, I think there's something like called dependent populations, and that's basically, for example, a country. For example, let's look at Africa, right? Another very vulnerable place of the planet, and there's a lot of childs, like a lot of children over there, or like even India, for example, suffers a little bit of this problem. So that's a dependent population. Childs are just a money burning machine, right? They need food, diapers, just like time, right? So like both parents can't work. Like it's pretty tough. So countries with a lot of children tend to suffer a lot. And I'm guessing China is going to have soon the opposite spectrum of the pyramid, like old retired people that you have to pay them social security. There has to be infrastructure in place so like you can take care of them. Modern societies don't generally take care of themselves of the old people, but you generally take them to a retirement home or a senior place, something like that.
Now, let's add some detail to be more scientific and see what those look like. I promise this is going somewhere. The first group are seniors. With only their savings remaining, retirees are low spenders, have little room for risk,
Yeah.
and thanks to their prudence, are of the least interest to most marketers. The second group are the producers, and economically, the only one that matters. During our
Yep.
30s and 40s, we reach the peak of our earning potential and put all that money into stocks, retirement funds, and expensive vacations.
Ideally, right?
Another name for this group might be the Greats. Nearly all of the world's Nobel Prize winners and great inventors were in this age bracket. The average age of top startup founders is 45. These individuals have an outsized influence on the world,
That's actually like
and
a little
thus
older
even a
than I
small
thought.
change in their size ripples throughout the nation. Next are the borrowers, students, fresh graduates, and the drivers of demand for loans.
That's me.
Finally, and most useless of them all, are babies, little money-eating machines which, conveniently, wait several decades before offering anything of value.
Oh, yeah.
Alright, now that we've defined each cohort, we can begin to see why their relative size is where the magic happens. While there may not be a single most optimal shape, there are certainly more and less desirable shapes, economically speaking.
Like something like
And each
this.
kind of imbalance will lead to a different kind of problem or benefit. To show this, let's
Holy
imagine
shit.
the unrealistic extremes. If 90% of a country were babies, we'd have a national babysitter shortage, lots of crying, and not much else.
A lot of
If
diapers.
90% were aged
and
between
shit.
30 and 60, it'd be amazingly productive, punching well above its weight class, with no dependents to care for. But fast forward 20 years and it would all come crashing down, as they all retired at the same time, and waited for Social Security, which there'd be no one left to pay for. Expect total social collapse. Now, none of this is to discount the role of culture, political system, physical environment, or any other factor for that matter.
Yeah, there's a lot more
All of
to
these
it.
things play a role, but think of them as a few of the necessary ingredients, the egg, sugar, and butter to demography's flour. Without the ingredient of functional government, you can't bake the cookie. But no matter how effective the government, how strong the military, or influential the economy, none of it is sufficient if you're missing the final key ingredient, the right population. Another
Oh.
way of saying this is that by looking only at the shape of a country's population, without any absolute numbers or extra information, we can already get a sense of its range of possible futures. We can tell, for example, that this super fast-growing country has a massive opportunity. If it industrializes fast enough, it could harness this large working age cohort with few dependents to modernize and raise the standard of living. If those in power fail to manage that transition, the larger population will only mean more starvation, more disease, and less land. This is Nigeria.
Oh, whoa.
Likewise, we can conclude that this one has just experienced decades of miraculous growth, but will soon and very
Which one is
quickly
this?
age, shrinking considerably in the process. How the government responds will determine whether this is merely disastrous or truly catastrophic. This is China.
Ooh.
Its past 40 years of celebrated growth, the basis for predictions of China's rise, the source of general optimism, the trend which many assume will continue, coincides
It's
with
borrowed
this
time.
hump in the pyramid, which represents tens of millions of extra people in their prime working years. Everything that made China what it is today has relied on a large, young, and productive workforce. Now, that workforce is about to succumb to biology, just as every other generation has in every other country ever. Graphs describing China tend to take this shape, but demographers know better. They know that this has only been a temporary, transitional state on the road to industrialization. It even has a name. It's called a demographic dividend. During this
Right,
time,
yeah,
life
that's- yeah.
expectancy is still catching up, meaning there are few retirees. At the same time, fewer babies are being
I
born.
think I think I saw a video. I don't think it was from him, but it was someone talking about Africa. And so that's why I mentioned Africa in like a
as
previous
women receive access to
comment.
education. For these few years, and only these few years, the country in transition has all the manpower in the world, which, when well coordinated, translates to exceptional economic growth. There's a painful flip side, however. What looks like a dividend will eventually feel more like a loan. The scary thing about retirement is that it happens all at once. While income tends to rise steadily throughout your career, it doesn't much fade away at 65. One day, you retire, and that day, your income falls to zero. Which is to say, in a few years, these workers will retire, moving the pyramid upward and leaving the country's future to this shrinking base, and it will happen all at once. Remember, this little hump was behind the last few decades of growth, and this little dip represents its future. China's working age cohort grew from 58% of the country in 1978 to 74% in 2010.
Whoa, 74.
But in less than 20 years, the UN predicts that number will be roughly back where it was in 78. By then, China will have twice as many seniors as children under 15. And at the end of this century, its total population...
Now, we're talking about China, like twice, that's a lot. If, let's say today, China has like 200 million seniors, double that, that's 400 seniors. It's insane.
...will be cut in half. You might think that, having worked during this growth phase, China's elders will be well prepared for retirement. But its per capita wealth remains low, on the level of Mexico, the Maldives, and Kazakhstan.
Yeah, that's not very great.
That means this mass of retirees won't just contribute less to the economy, but will also require immense financial support. The kind China's fractured pension and healthcare system isn't remote.
You know, let's put our economist hat back on. Let's say the government doesn't take out the elders, then that means the expense, because that's in economic terms what an elder is. It's an expense. You know, that the family has to take that expense in, right? You take care of your parents, you take care of your grandparents, whatever. So that means that the population, the Chinese population, the booming middle class that's going on in China right now, it's going to be spending less on new products and services provided by the Chinese corporations, but being spent on their elders. This is a huge issue, not only for the government and like retirement, like the government is going to pay you retirement. That's not really the issue. The issue is a whole economic concept that of people spending less money because they have to take care of their elders. And that's going to mean that people are going to be having less babies because they already take care of someone. So this just makes everything a lot more complicated, really. Like this is messed up.
Put simply, all of China's recent progress has been bought on credit, and it's finally coming time to repay. Now, why, you might ask, can't Chinese people simply have more babies? If families were once larger, why can't they just return that way? Recall, however, that because of the 20-year gap between a baby born today and its first real contribution to society, the damage is already done. Demography plays out over the course of generations, and today's smaller baby cohort will mean even fewer babies when they reach adulthood. But fine, setting aside that this problem can only be solved in a minimum of 2 decades, even if the solution were known and implemented tomorrow, remember what we're talking about. It's easy to get lost in the language of generations and cohorts. Demography can unfortunately be dehumanizing, and in the process lose sight of what fertility really means, the very complex decision of adults to have children. Some of this choice is beyond the reach of government. Perception of parenthood, tradition, and family are first and foremost formed based on one's own family. Unfortunately for China, the one-child policy has set the cultural expectation firmly at 1.
A family should only have
one.
one.
Just isn't enough. Assuming it takes 2 people to make a baby, together they need at least 2 just to replace themselves, plus a small fraction more to account for early deaths. That means a country needs a total fertility rate, the number of children the average woman will have in her lifetime, of 2.1. just to sustain its current
Yeah, this is
population.
just replacement level.
China's is currently 1.6,
Sheesh.
if you believe the government. If you don't believe the average Chinese woman has 1.6 children in a country where the vast majority were, until recently, only allowed to have one, then you might be tempted to believe someone like Yi Fujian, a scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who estimates the true number at 1.18.
Whoa.
To get a better sense of just
Sheesh.
how hard this problem is, think of fertility rate as an ungainly machine controlled by 100 different unlabeled levers. Policymakers know of at least a few levers that will predictably lower the TFR, but once the machine has slowed, there's neither a clear way of getting it going again, nor any proof.
I think there are places like Poland and Hungary, places that I honestly trash a lot sometimes, but and they are trying to like raise up their fertility rate because these are places that have very low fertility rates, just like China, but at the same time, just like China, in a way, they are not taking in like immigrants. So what's happening is like a very alarming shrinking of the population. Like maybe not right now, but like in 10, 20 years, these places, these countries are going to see like big aging populations and at the same time very low productive populations. So I think what they're doing, places like that, and you guys can check me on this, it's like giving credits for people that have children and like tax deductions, but those things are not working for them. Like they're not, they're simply not, because humans are more complicated than that. You know, just offering a tax credit for the amount of children that you're having, it's just not going to make you have a children, especially when we as a society are becoming more urban. We like living in cities because in a lot of ways it makes sense living in cities. So but having 4 or 5 children in a 2 bedroom apartment, it's impossible. Having one children in a 2 bedroom apartment is like complicated. Having two, like sharing the same bedroom, it's just a complicated issue.
Proof that it's even
Very
possible
complicated.
at
So
the scale
complicated nobody knows how
necessary.
to solve it.
There is, on the other hand, precedent for these attempts failing, even by proud and authoritarian
Oh,
Singapore.
it will.
But before we pour salt on this demographic wound, let's be fair and start with the positive. For starters, Chinese workers are becoming better educated, meaning it will take fewer workers to make the same economic contribution. And to the extent that automation replaces labor,
Yeah, that's
the
true
need
as
for
well.
a strong working age population may diminish, leaving China with the same old challenges faced by other automated countries. It would also be unfair not to mention that China's problem stems from a few strictly good developments. Women are choosing to have fewer babies because they can, and
I love
seniors are
how
living
Asian
longer
elders
thanks
just
to a
like
rise in
practice Tai Chi
standards of
in
living.
parks.
These richer, longer, and more fulfilling lives have value on their own. Now, a summary of the bad news. There's a lack of reliable data and reporting, which means no one truly knows how bad the problem is. The simultaneous rising life expectancy means seniors will burden the economy for longer than ever. China's preference for male babies means that between 2020 and 2060,
Whoop.
there will be roughly 3 single men for every 2 single women.
Jesus.
There's the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, whose slowing of fertility may simply hasten the inevitable, or permanently make things worse, both scenarios bad. Compounding the problem is the government's unwillingness to accept blame or reverse course. After 35 years of the one-child policy, there's a desperate need to justify its costly existence. As of 2015, most families are now allowed only 2 children, and even that change in policy has had little effect. Finally, there's the slow and invisible nature of the problem. Consider the last time
kinda
you
like
saw a
climate
news headline
change.
about declining births. Like climate change, there will
Oh,
always be a
hey.
more urgent crisis that takes precedence. And because the effects of a demographic crisis are felt over years, not days,
Decades.
those who highlight the problem will be labeled by many as melodramatic. In other words, the slowness of the problem makes it
Yeah, that's a
harder,
nice
not
neighborhood, though.
easier to mitigate. While these facts have been known for years, only last year did we receive authoritative confirmation in China's 2020 census, which tallied 14.65 million births the previous year, the lowest level since 1961. With our fears confirmed, now the question
Shit.
turns to just how bad will the fallout be?
Ooh, super
Perhaps
bad.
the closest comparison is the fate of Japan, also once a fast-growing economy hailed as the next
My
superpower,
God, look
and
at that.
also aging.
That's
With a
horrible.
median age of 48.6, Japan is the second oldest place on Earth. Today, its share of the world's manufacturing exports has fallen from 12.5% to just
At
5.2.
the same time, you also have Germany on that list, which is a growing economy, one of the strongest economy in Europe. So, take that how you will.
Japan did not fade into global irrelevance. It's still a
It's
great power, but
slowly.
it never fulfilled what once seemed certain: its rise to rival the US as a superpower. And it never will. China's repayment of its demographic loan will, at a minimum, place a severe strain on its economy. With this strain will likely come a sobering reassessment of its rise. Demography alone cannot predict the future, and it would be foolish to forecast specific social or political implications, but one cannot help but wonder: what drastic things does a nation do in this limited window of time before its power wanes? What does a generation of young people think when they
Nothing.
face far more challenging prospects than did their parents? And what culture develops in the absence of any hope for marriage among 34 million men?
There's nothing to
Deng
be done,
Xiaoping
dude.
may have indeed been right when he cautioned the Asian century may never arrive. And we're just getting started. China's demographic crisis will soon seep into its single biggest driver of growth: the elusive and out-of-control property market. Housing is China's next reckoning, a topic that
Whoa.
deserves its own video, next time in part 2. In the meantime, you may have noticed that the US also has a TFR of 1.7, well below replacement level. Does this mean it too is in for a similar fall? Find out why or why not in the bonus section, which replaces this on Nebula. Nebula is the streaming site I helped create to give a home to more experience.
I mean, fuck yeah, I want to watch it. All right, let's see. What's the name of this guy? Polymatter. There we go. So I'm gonna follow him on Nebula, and we can see. But if we answer his question, I don't really think the U.S. is having the same problem. Like the U.S. is the place that takes the most immigrants. So I think when you add in the immigrants, and I read this a long time ago, so maybe it has changed. But like when you add in the immigrants, the replacement rate like is either 2 or 2.1, and it's very similar in places like France, like Spain, the United Kingdom, where the fertility rate without immigrants is like 1.4, 1.5. But when you add in the immigrant population is between like 1.7 and 2. France, I think, has the highest fertility rate in all of Europe. Why? Because they take a lot of immigrants, and that's a whole nother topic. And I know that a lot of people don't like it, and it's just like it's a sensitive issue for a lot of people. But hey, it is what it is. So I'm excited to watch part 2. Uh, if you like this video, guys, please don't forget to support me on the links on the description. That really helps a lot. You can also share and subscribe to the channel, and comment would you like me to react to part 2 and 3 and 4 of this video series? Tell me in the comments.